My name is Clara, I'm 31 years old, and the Christmas that changed everything started with a gift card worth $25 and ended with my grandmother sliding an envelope into my hand and whispering 4 words that I have thought about every day since. "Don't open this in front of them." She said it so quietly that the person sitting beside her did not hear it. The envelope was small, the kind used for greeting cards. She pressed it into my palm beneath the table with the practiced ease of someone who had been planning the gesture long enough to know exactly how to execute it without attracting attention. I closed my hand around it. I looked at my grandmother across the 3 inches of space between us. She was looking at her dessert plate, but the corner of her mouth had moved in the way it moved when she knew something the rest of the room did not. Before I tell you what was in that envelope, I need to take you back to the hour before she handed it to me, because the envelope only makes sense once you understand the room it was given in and the family that filled it, and the specific quality of the laughter that was still fading when my grandmother reached beneath the table. Before we continue, have you ever sat at a family table and realized you were loved only when you were useful? If you have, drop your first name and your city in the comments. I want to know who's listening tonight, and subscribe before we go further, because this story starts quietly, but it doesn't stay that way. Now let me take you back. My family did Secret Santa every Christmas with a $300 limit. This had been the arrangement for 6 years, established in the period when my siblings began earning the kind of money that made gift-giving a form of status communication rather than a form of affection. $300 per person, names drawn in November, gifts presented on Christmas Eve at my parents' house in the particular atmosphere of a family that had decided its gatherings should look a certain way and invested accordingly. Warm lights, good wine, a cheese board my mother assembled with the deliberateness of someone who knew the difference between the cheeses and wanted everyone to know she knew. A tree that had been professionally decorated 2 weeks before Christmas by a service my sister had recommended. My sister Lauren was 35 and worked in luxury real estate. She had the ease of someone for whom money had never required the kind of sustained attention that changes how a person moves through the world. She wore it the way people wear clothes they have always had, without consciousness, without gratitude, just presence. My brother Derek was 38 and ran a financial advisory firm that he described at every family gathering with the specific frequency of someone who needs the description repeated in order to feel certain it is true. He had a watch collection and a membership at a golf club whose annual fee exceeded my monthly rent, and a habit of asking people what they drove within the first 10 minutes of meeting them. Their spouses fit the architecture. My sister's husband Marcus managed commercial properties. Derek's wife Patrice worked in marketing for a luxury hotel brand and had the social fluency of someone who had been trained to make expensive things seem ordinary. Then there was me. I had left a corporate communications job 3 years earlier, after a period I described to people outside the family as a transition and described to myself with more honesty as a collapse. Not dramatic, structural. The kind of exhaustion that accumulates over years until one morning the system that has been running on determination alone simply will not start. I had spent the 18 months after leaving doing something nobody in my family had a vocabulary for. I had taken care of my grandmother. My grandmother's name was Ruth. She was 79 at the Christmas of the gift card and had been dealing with the particular combination of mobility issues and mild cardiac complications that required more attention than she would accept from anyone she thought of as having better things to do. She accepted it from me because she understood, without either of us having to name it, that I was in a period of my life that had more space in it than the previous period had allowed. I drove her to appointments. I sat with her on Tuesday afternoons and ate the specific crackers she had been buying since 1987. I learned her medications. I learned which doctors she trusted and which ones she found condescending. I learned the names of her friends and the names of the neighbors she found trying, and the name of the Cardinal that appeared in her backyard every morning and that she had been calling George for 4 years. My family did not understand this as work. They understood it as available. The distinction mattered. The Secret Santa that Christmas had been organized by Lauren, who sent a group message in November with the name Drawing Protocol and the $300 reminder and a note that said, "Let's make it good this year," with a champagne emoji. Lauren received a designer handbag, burgundy leather with the hardware detail she had mentioned in a conversation 6 weeks earlier that whoever drew her name had apparently remembered. She held it up and everyone appreciated it in the way the room had been trained to appreciate things. Derek received a watch, not his primary category, which was a specific Swiss brand, but a secondary one he had been considering. He put it on at the table and turned his wrist in the candlelight and said exactly what people say when they have received something they wanted and want the room to know it. Marcus received a golf club membership, 1 year at a course he had been wanting to try. He read the certificate twice and then looked up with the expression of someone calculating what that had cost. Then it was my turn. The package had my name on it in handwriting I did not recognize. Small, deliberately wrapped, the kind of wrapping that communicates the gift inside, is not the point. I opened it. A gift card, $25 to a coffee chain. Folded around it, a small note, written in the same handwriting as the tag. 3 words and a period. Finally contributing less. The room did the thing rooms do when something has been said that everyone recognized as wrong and nobody wants to be the one who says so. Awkward laughter arrived and spread unevenly around the table. My mother looked at the centerpiece. My sister smiled into her wine glass with the small private satisfaction of someone watching a thing land that they expected to land. My father said, "Come on, it's just a joke." I said nothing. I looked at the gift card for a moment, then I looked up and smiled the smile I had been using in rooms like this one since I was approximately 14 years old. The smile that says I am fine and does not require anyone to examine whether that is true. I set the gift card on the table beside my plate. Then my grandmother's hand moved beneath the table. Her fingers found my hand with the practiced ease of a woman who had been planning this for longer than the evening. She pressed the envelope into my palm. Small, sealed, my name written on the front in her handwriting. She said 4 words at a volume that did not travel past us. "Don't open this in front of them." I closed my hand around the envelope. I looked at her. She was looking at her dessert plate, but the corner of her mouth had moved. I stayed for another hour, not because I wanted to, because leaving immediately would have given the room something to discuss. And I was not interested in providing that. I had learned a long time ago that the most effective response to being made the subject of a room was to remain in it long enough to become unremarkable and then leave without ceremony. I ate dessert. I participated in the conversation that moved around the table in the way of family gatherings that have passed their emotional peak and are now running on wine and social habit. I helped my mother carry plates to the kitchen. I hugged my grandmother for slightly longer than the usual goodbye, and she held on in the specific way she held on when she meant something more than the hug. I drove home in the dark with the envelope on the passenger seat. My apartment was small, not struggling small, chosen small. I had moved into it 18 months earlier with the deliberate intention of simplifying rather than performing, and had found, in its 1,100 square feet, a quality of space that the larger apartment I had shared during my corporate years had never produced. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table. I looked at the envelope, my grandmother's handwriting on the front. Clara, the loop of the C slightly wider than modern cursive preferred, the artifact of penmanship learned in the 1950s and never updated. I knew her handwriting the way I knew her voice, by texture rather than analysis. I opened it. Inside was a folded note, and behind the note a smaller sealed envelope marked in my grandmother's hand with 3 words, "For the attorney." I read the note first, her handwriting, 4 paragraphs, unhurried. She wrote that she had been watching her family for a long time and that watching carefully was something she had always done, and that what she had seen over the last several decades had clarified certain things for her about the difference between people who understood the value of what they had been given and people who understood only the price of what they wanted. She wrote that she had made decisions accordingly. She wrote that the sealed envelope for the attorney contained instructions for her estate trustee, and that I should call the number on the business card tucked behind it before the end of the month, and that when I called I should use the phrase she had written at the bottom of the note, a phrase she said the attorney would recognize immediately. She wrote that she was sorry the Christmas had gone the way it had. She wrote that she had watched me smile. She wrote, "That smile is not something to practice. Stop using it for people who have not earned the honesty behind it." Then she wrote the last line. I wanted someone in this family who understands the difference between attention and value. I have been watching for 31 years. I found her. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after I finished reading. The tea had gone cold. Outside the window, the city was doing what the city did on Christmas Eve, carrying on with the specific indifference of a place that does not organize itself around individual occasions. I picked up the business card. The attorney's name was James Alderton. Below the name, a title, Estate and Trust Law. Below that, a phone number. Behind the card, in my grandmother's handwriting, the phrase I was to use when I called. I read it. I understood why she had written it down. It was not a phrase that arrived naturally in conversation. It was the phrase a woman uses when she has been thinking about something for a long time and has finally decided the thinking is finished and the doing should begin. I put the card and the note and the sealed envelope back in their envelope. I sealed it again with a piece of tape from the drawer. I put it on the shelf above the desk where I kept the things that required action. Then I sat back down at the kitchen table, and I thought about my grandmother watching from the corner of her mouth while my family laughed, and I thought about 31 years of a woman paying attention to something nobody else in the room was paying attention to. I thought about what she had seen. I thought about what it meant that she had been waiting for the right moment to hand it to me. And I understood, sitting in the quiet of my kitchen on Christmas Eve with the cold tea and the city outside doing its indifferent thing, that the joke had not been the gift card. The joke had been the room's understanding of what was happening in it. And the punchline was not going to arrive until I made a phone call. I called James Alderton on the 28th of December, not immediately after Christmas. I had thought about calling the next morning, and then I had thought about the way my grandmother had said it, and decided the instruction to call before the end of the month was an instruction and not a suggestion, but that she had also said before the end of the month rather than tomorrow, which meant she had built in time, and the time was there to be used. I spent the 3 days between Christmas and the call reading the note again, not obsessively. The way you reread something when you understand it changed the meaning of other things, and you want to make sure you have located all the things it changed. The line that stayed with me was the simplest one. I wanted someone in this family who understands the difference between attention and value. I had been thinking about that distinction since Christmas Eve. Attention was what my family had always organized itself around. The watch on Derek's wrist that caught the candlelight, Lauren's handbag held up for the room, the golf club membership read aloud from a certificate so everyone could register the amount it implied. These were objects of attention. They existed most fully when other people could see them. Value was something different. Value was the drive to a cardiology appointment on a Tuesday when Ruth did not want to take the bus in the cold. Value was learning the names of her medications and the name of the Cardinal in her backyard. Value was sitting with someone in the particular quiet of an afternoon when the television is off, and the conversation is the kind that does not perform itself for any audience. My family had not seen those things as valuable because they could not photograph them. My grandmother had been watching long enough to know the difference. I called at 9 on the 28th. James Alderton answered on the third ring in the voice of a man who had been practicing his profession long enough that phone calls no longer required him to modulate his tone for the weight of the subject matter. Calm, precise, ready. I said my name. I said the phrase my grandmother had written at the bottom of the note. There was a pause on his end. Not the pause of surprise, the pause of recognition. The pause of a man who has been holding a file for a particular phone call and has just understood the call has arrived. He said, "Miss Clara, I have been expecting to hear from you. Your grandmother told me you would call before the new year." I said she was specific about the timeline. He said she was specific about everything. That was her way. He asked me to come to his office. Not urgently. At my convenience, he said, though his tone implied convenience should be soon. I scheduled it for the 30th. His office was in a building that communicated the particular authority of permanence. Old brick, a lobby with dark wood paneling, the smell of paper, and something institutional that I associated with places where important decisions had been documented and stored for retrieval. James Alderton was 63, silver-haired, with the careful physical stillness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the information being exchanged required people to be still. He shook my hand and gestured to the chair across from his desk and placed a folder in the center of the surface between us, with the deliberateness of someone presenting something that had been in their care for a long time. He said, "Your grandmother first came to me 11 years ago." I said, 11 years. He said she was 68. She said she had been thinking about her estate for some time and had decided she wanted to structure it carefully before her health became a relevant consideration. He paused. She also said she had been watching her family for 40 years and had developed some clear views about how her assets should be distributed and to whom. I said, "Did she tell you about those views?" He said, in detail. Over 11 years and 7 meetings, she was extremely thorough. He opened the folder. "I want to walk you through the structure because it is more considered than most estates I manage, and I want you to understand it completely before we discuss the practical implications." He walked me through it slowly, the way a good professional walks someone through something complex, in the order that allows each piece to prepare the ground for the next one. My grandmother had built her estate in 3 layers. The first layer was her house, a property she had owned outright since 1989 in a neighborhood that had appreciated significantly in the decades since. She had maintained it with the specific attention of someone who understood that a well-maintained property compounds in value the way a well-managed investment does. The house was in a trust. The trust named me as sole beneficiary. I said, "What about my parents?" He said, "Your parents were offered the opportunity to purchase the property at market value during your grandmother's lifetime. They declined." He said it without editorializing. The fact was the fact. The second layer was a portfolio, investment accounts she had been building since the early 1990s through a combination of index funds, a small number of individual holdings she had researched herself, and the compounding patience of someone who understood that time was the variable most people underestimated. She had never touched the principal. She had reinvested every distribution for 30 years. He told me the current value. I set my pen down. He waited. I picked up my pen. He continued. The third layer was what he called the operational asset, a property she had purchased 9 years earlier, a building in a coastal town 3 hours from where I lived, an inn, small 12 rooms, a restaurant space on the ground floor that had been leased to a series of tenants over the years, the most recent of whom had vacated 14 months earlier. The building had good bones, my grandmother's phrase which James quoted directly, and had been maintained well but had not been developed to its potential because, as she had noted in their most recent meeting, she had been waiting for the right person to develop it. He said, "She described the inn to me in several of our meetings. She said it was the kind of property that required someone who understood the difference between running a place and caring for one." I said, "Did she say why she thought I was that person?" He looked at the folder for a moment. He said, "She said, and I am quoting here because she asked me to read this section directly. She said Clara has been caring for things other people overlooked her entire life. The inn needs what she already knows how to give it." I sat with that. The window behind James showed the brick of the building across the street and a strip of December sky above it, gray and clear and very still. I said, "What are the conditions?" He said, "There are no conditions. The trust is straightforward. You inherit all 3 layers without condition or restriction. Your grandmother's only instruction beyond the legal structure was the note she gave you at Christmas and the phrase that brought you here." I said, "Why the phrase?" He said, "She wanted to make sure the first person who contacted this office was you, and not someone claiming to represent you or acting on your behalf. She said, if you called yourself and used those specific words, it would tell me everything I needed to know about whether you had read the note and understood it." I said, "And if I had not called?" He said, "The trust has a provision for that. If you had not contacted this office within 6 months of her death, the estate would have been distributed to a charitable foundation she had already selected." He paused. She was not leaving room for the assets to be accessible to anyone who did not choose to come looking for them. She had built the whole thing so that it required me to act, not react, act. There was a difference, and she had been teaching me the difference since I was 9 years old, eating crackers on a Tuesday afternoon. I drove to the inn on a Saturday in early January, alone. 3 hours with the heat running and a playlist I had made the night before, and the specific quality of thinking that only happens when you are moving forward at consistent speed with nothing requiring your immediate attention. The town was small, the kind that exists comfortably in winter without the tourist infrastructure that summer brings, going about its actual life without performing itself for anyone. The main street had a hardware store and a diner and a bookshop with a handwritten sign in the window and the particular ease of a place that had been itself for a long time. The inn was on a side street 2 blocks from the water, white clapboard, 3 stories, a covered porch running the full width of the front. The restaurant space on the ground floor had windows that looked toward the street and beyond the street toward the water. The building had the quality my grandmother had described. Good bones. The kind of structure that had been built to last and had lasted and was now waiting to be properly understood, rather than simply maintained. I stood on the porch for a few minutes. The cold came off the water in the way cold comes off water in January, with a directness that was not unfriendly but was absolutely honest. I thought about my grandmother sitting with James Alderton 11 years ago, and telling him she had developed some clear views about how her assets should be distributed. I thought about her watching from the corner of her mouth while the room laughed at a $25 gift card. I thought about the envelope pressed into my palm with 4 words at a volume that did not travel. She had been building this for 11 years. She had been watching for 31. I unlocked the front door with the key James had given me. Inside smelled like old wood and salt air and the particular emptiness of a space that has been maintained but not inhabited. The restaurant space was clean. The kitchen behind it was dated but functional. The stairs to the upper floors were solid, each step firm under my weight without the give of a structure that had been neglected. I walked every room, 12 guest rooms, each one with a window, most of them facing east toward the water. Small bathrooms, good light, the simple bones of a place that did not need to be made into something it was not. It needed to be made into the best version of what it already was. I sat on the windowsill of the corner room on the 3rd floor and looked at the water. The winter light was doing something specific to it, making it look older and more permanent than water and summer light, the way certain kinds of light reveal the actual age of things. I thought about the inn as it could be, not as a fantasy, as a practical plan with a realistic timeline and a clear set of decisions that would need to be made in a sensible order. I had spent 3 years rebuilding my own structure after the collapse. I understood what it took to assess a thing honestly and address it systematically rather than emotionally. The inn needed someone who understood that difference. I took out the notebook I had brought and I started writing. Meanwhile, my family's understanding of Christmas continued unchanged. Lauren posted photographs from a post-Christmas trip on the 27th. Marcus had surprised her with a long weekend at a resort. The photographs had the quality of things taken in good light at places designed to produce good photographs. She captioned one of them, "Life is good when you work for it." Derek sent a group family message on New Year's Eve that was warm and general and included a photograph of himself and Patrice at a party that communicated the kind of occasion it was through the background details. He wished everyone a prosperous New Year. My mother texted me separately, "Happy New Year, sweetheart. How are you doing?" The "how are you doing" that arrived annually around this time, which was the "how are you doing" of obligation rather than inquiry. I replied that I was well and meant it in a way I had not meant it in some time. My grandmother did not send anything. She was in the hospital by the 2nd week of January. Her cardiologist had been monitoring a situation that had been developing through the autumn, and the situation had required admission. She was stable, but the word stable had a weight to it in that context that everyone understood meant something more complicated than its surface definition. I drove to see her on a Thursday. She was sitting up when I arrived, which was the first thing she did, to communicate that she was still herself regardless of the institutional context. She looked at me when I came through the door and said, "You went to see the inn." I said, "How did you know?" She said, "You have the look you get when you have been planning something." I said, "I do not have a look." She said, "You have had that look since you were 11 years old, and you should not let anyone talk you out of it." I sat in the chair beside her bed. I said, "It is exactly what you described." She said, "The bones are good." I said, "The bones are very good." She took my hand. She said, "I have been watching this family for a long time, Clara. I watched all of them. I want you to know that." I said, "I know." She said, "I watched how everyone treated the people who had nothing obvious to offer them. That is the test, the way a person treats someone who cannot do anything for them. Your brother asks waiters what they drive. Your sister does not remember the names of people who work for her. Your parents talk about your grandmother, meaning me, as if I am a logistical concern rather than a person." I said nothing. She said, "You learned the Cardinal's name." I said, "George." She smiled. She said, "It is George." We sat together for a while in the way we had been sitting together for 3 years on Tuesday afternoons, in the quiet that did not require anything from either of us. When I left, she held my hand for a moment at the door. She said, "Whatever happens next, you already have everything you need. The rest is just doing the work in the order it needs doing." I said, "I know." She said, "I know you know." I drove home in the dark. By the time I reached my apartment, I had the first 3 months of the inn's renovation planned in the notebook on the passenger seat. My grandmother had been right about the look. I had been wearing it since I was 11. My grandmother died on a Tuesday in February. Not dramatically, not in the way that deaths arrive in stories, with a final statement and a gathered family and a sense of ceremony that the dying person has somehow orchestrated. She died quietly in the early morning while I was driving to the hospital for the Tuesday visit that had been our arrangement since the autumn, and by the time I arrived, the nurse at the station recognized me, and her expression told me before she said anything. I sat in the chair beside the bed for a long time. The window showed the same gray February sky I had driven under for 3 hours. The room was warm and quiet, and had the particular stillness of a space that has just changed in a way that cannot be changed back. I held her hand. I thought about a Tuesday afternoon in her kitchen with the specific crackers she had been buying since 1987 and the Cardinal named George in the backyard. I thought about her handwriting on the envelope. I thought about the corner of her mouth. I did not cry immediately. The crying came later, in the car in the hospital parking structure, in the particular way that grief arrives when you have been holding it back long enough to reach somewhere private. It was the honest kind, the ugly kind, the kind that does not perform itself for anyone. I let it be what it was. Then I drove home. My family found out the contents of the estate through James Alderton 3 weeks after the funeral. The funeral itself had been the kind of occasion that reveals character in the way that occasions organized around loss always do. Lauren had worn the right thing and said the right things and cried in the photogenic way that some people cry, which is to say with the awareness of being observed. Derek had delivered a brief eulogy that was warm and general and could have been about anyone's grandmother. My parents had organized the reception with the competence they brought to organized occasions and the particular emotional distance they brought to everything else. I had read a passage she had asked me to read. She had given me the book 2 months before she died, with a yellow sticky note marking the page and her handwriting on the note that said, "This one, please." It was 3 paragraphs from a writer she had been reading since her 30s, about patience, about the specific intelligence that develops in people who have learned to wait for the right moment rather than forcing the available ones. The room had been quiet while I read it. The probate meeting at James Alderton's office happened on a Thursday afternoon. My parents, Lauren, Derek, and myself. James had arranged 5 chairs across from his desk with the neutral attention of a man who had done this many times and understood that the arrangement of furniture communicated something about the meeting before it began. He read the trust structure in the order he had described it to me in December. He read the house first. My mother made a sound, not a word. A sound. The specific, involuntary sound of someone receiving information that requires immediate reprocessing of an assumption they had not examined because it had felt so established, it did not require examination. My father said, "The house goes to Clara." James said, "The house is in a trust of which Clara is the sole beneficiary." Yes. Lauren said, "Grandma owned that house for 40 years. James said, "She did. She made the decision about its disposition 11 years ago. Derek said 11 years ago, Clara was 20 years old. James said, "That is correct." He read the portfolio next. The number landed differently in that room than it had landed in James's office when he told me alone. In his office, it had been information I needed time to absorb. In that room, it was the same information arriving simultaneously to 5 people with 5 different relationships to it, and the difference in those relationships was visible in real time. My father looked at the desk. Lauren looked at me. Derek looked at the folder in front of James as though looking at it carefully might change what it contained. My mother said we had no idea the accounts were that size. James said, "Your mother was a patient and consistent investor over many decades. The accounts reflect that." Then he read the in. Lauren said she owned property in Harlow. James said she purchased it 9 years ago. Derek said none of us knew about this. James said she did not discuss her asset decisions with family members. That was her preference. He said the inn is also in Clara's trust. The room went quiet in a way that had a different quality than the quiet that had preceded it. The first quiet had been surprise. This quiet was something more complicated. The sound of 5 people simultaneously doing arithmetic on a situation and arriving at numbers that required them to revise their understanding of a very long time. My mother said, "Why Clara?" James looked at her. He said, "Your mother left a letter for this meeting. She asked me to read 1 paragraph from it to the full family." He opened a separate folder. She said, "I have watched this family for 50 years. I watched how each member treated the people who had nothing to offer them in return. I watched how each member responded to difficulty that was not their own. I watched who showed up on Tuesdays. I made my decisions accordingly." He folded the letter. He said, "That concludes the reading." Lauren found me in the hallway outside James's office afterward. She had the expression of someone who has spent the last 45 minutes inside a room that rearranged their understanding of several things and has not yet finished the rearranging. She said, "I did not know you were that close to her." I said, "I drove her to appointments for 3 years." She said, "I did not know that either." I said, "I know you did not." She looked at the wall. She said, "I should have known." I said, "Yes." She said, "The gift card thing at Christmas, that was Derek's wife's idea. The note was hers." I said, "I know whose idea it was." She said, I laughed. I said, "I know." She said, "I am sorry." It was the first time Lauren had apologized to me for anything in the specific way that apologies work when they are not protecting the person saying them. Not, "I am sorry you felt that way." Not, "I am sorry if it came across wrong." Just the 2 words without the architecture of self-protection around them. I said, "I know you are." She said, "What are you going to do with the inn?" I said, "Open it." She said, "By yourself." I said, "I have been working on the plan since January." She looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before. Not envy, exactly. Something more complicated than envy. The expression of someone who is encountering a version of a person they thought they understood and finding that the version is larger than the understanding was. She said she always knew things about us that we did not know about ourselves. I said that was her way. Lauren said nothing else. She went back to find her husband, and I walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. The renovation of the inn began in March. I had spent January and February building the plan with the same methodical attention I had given everything since Christmas. a contractor I had found through a referral from James, who had mentioned that his firm occasionally connected clients with reliable tradespeople in coastal properties. A designer whose work I had found online and whose aesthetic aligned with what I understood the inn to be rather than what someone else might want to turn it into. The work took 4 months. I was there most weeks, not supervising in the way that communicates distrust, present in the way that communicates investment. I learned the building the way my grandmother had said I would, by being in it consistently enough that its rhythms became familiar. The restaurant space on the ground floor became a dining room, not a restaurant in the commercial sense, a dining room in the sense of a place where guests ate food that had been prepared with care in a kitchen that had been properly equipped. I hired a chef named Donna who had worked in larger kitchens for 15 years and had been looking for a context where the scale allowed her to cook the way she wanted to cook rather than the way volume required. The 12 guest rooms became 10. I had taken 2 of them and combined them into a sitting room on the second floor where guests could read or look at the water without being in either the public spaces or their private rooms. My grandmother had said the inn needed what I already knew how to give it. What I knew how to give was the quality of space that did not demand anything from the people inside it. The inn opened in late July. My family discovered it in the way families discover things when they have not been told but have been paying attention to the absence of information. Derek mentioned it first, in a group text in August, in the tone he used when he had received information through a channel he considered reliable and was presenting it as casual curiosity. He said, "Someone told me you opened a place in Harlow." I said, "Yes." He said, "Looks nice from the photos." I said, "Thank you." Lauren called the following week. She asked if she and Marcus could come for a weekend. I said yes and meant it without reservation because the conversation in the hallway outside James's office had changed something between us that I was willing to give time to develop. They came in September. Lauren walked through the inn with the professional eye of someone who spent her days assessing properties and the personal eye of someone who was looking for her grandmother in the building and finding her in the specific ways she had been placed there. The bones, the light through the east-facing windows in the morning, the quiet that the building held. She said, "She would have loved this." I said, "I know." She said, "It feels like her." I said, "That was what I was working toward." Marcus said it was the best breakfast he had eaten in years. My parents came in October. My mother walked through the dining room and stopped at the east window and looked at the water for a long time without saying anything. Then she turned. She said, "I did not understand what you were doing for her during those years." I said, "I know." She said, "I thought you were coasting." I said, "I know you thought that." She said, "I was wrong about what mattered." I said, "She was trying to show all of us. She just found that I was the one who was looking." My mother said, "She was always more patient with you." I said, "She was more patient with whoever paid attention." I happened to be paying attention. My mother looked at the window. She said, "I want to try." I said, "I know." I said, "Show up on Tuesdays." She looked at me. I said, "That was her test. The people who showed up on Tuesdays." She said it was how she knew. My mother said, "Tuesdays." I said, "Just Tuesdays." We start there. The first Christmas after my grandmother's death was in the inn. I had offered the space for a small gathering, and the family had accepted, and it was different from the previous Christmas in every register. No professional decorator, no $300 limit, no currency of comparison running beneath the warmth. Lauren brought wine. Derek brought his children who were 8 and 10 and had not been to the coast in the winter and spent the afternoon on the beach in coats that were not warm enough and did not care. My mother helped in the kitchen. My father sat in the second-floor sitting room and looked at the water and said very little and seemed content to be where he was. After dinner, I went upstairs to the corner room on the 3rd floor and sat on the windowsill where I had sat in January with a notebook and the first 3 months of the renovation planned on its pages. I had the note with me, the one from the envelope. I read the last line again. I wanted someone in this family who understands the difference between attention and value. I have been watching for 31 years. I found her. I folded it along the crease she had made. I held it for a moment, Outside, the December water was doing the same thing it had been doing in January, moving steadily and indifferently in the dark with no interest in the occasion happening above it. The bell of the harbor buoy rang once, low and distant. I thought about the corner of her mouth. I thought about George the Cardinal. I thought about crackers on a Tuesday afternoon and a woman sitting quietly at a table for decades, watching the difference between the people who treated her like a logistical concern and the one who showed up on Tuesdays to sit with her in the honest quiet. She had not left me a fortune as revenge. She had left me the evidence of what she had seen, and the inn was what I had made from the seeing. Here is what happened, plainly. At Christmas, my family gave me a $25 gift card with a note about contributing less while they opened designer bags and luxury watches and golf memberships. My grandmother pressed an envelope into my hand and told me not to open it in front of them. Inside was a note and a business card and instructions for an attorney she had been working with for 11 years. The estate had 3 layers: her house, a significant investment portfolio, and an inn on the coast that she had purchased 9 years earlier and maintained for the right person. I was the right person, not because I was successful or impressive or the kind of daughter of family photographs, because I showed up on Tuesdays. I drove her to appointments and learned her medications and learned the Cardinal's name. I spent 4 months renovating the inn and opened it in July. My family found out the way families find out things they were not told. Some of them changed in the ways people change when a situation has revealed something true about them and they are willing to look at it. Some are still working on it. I am still working on some things too. That is the whole story. Now here is what I want to leave with you. The people who measure your value by what you can show them will always be surprised by what you have built when they were not looking. This is not because you were hiding. It is because they were only watching for things they already knew how to recognize. My family recognized the designer bag. They recognized the watch and the golf membership. They recognized the currency of the room they were in and distributed it accordingly. They did not recognize the value of showing up on a Tuesday with nothing to offer except presents. My grandmother had been watching for the person who showed up without being watched. The person who learned the Cardinal's name not because it was useful, but because the Cardinal was there and the name mattered to someone she cared about. That is not a remarkable quality. It is a simple one. But simple and easy are not the same thing, and the difference between them is where character lives. The second thing, every family has someone who is watching more carefully than the rest of the room understands. Someone who has developed the patience to observe over decades rather than react in moments. Someone who has been building a clear picture of who each person is when nothing is being performed for their benefit. That person's assessment is the only one worth having. And if that person has been watching you, trust what they saw. My grandmother watched for 31 years and decided I was the one. I am still becoming worthy of what she decided. That is enough to work toward. Tell me in the comments your first name and your city. Tell me if you have ever been the person in the room whose value the room had not yet learned to recognize. And tell me if you had someone who saw it anyway. For more stories like this one, come find us. Every story on this channel is about someone who is underestimated by the people closest to them and chose to build something real instead of arguing about the estimation. Subscribe and stay. The next story starts the way all the honest ones do, with someone sitting quietly in a room full of noise, already knowing what the room has not yet understood.